Hey fangirls and boys, this is Natalie and you are watching Whole Lot of Love, and I am back, and I definitely had the urge to film today and I am very excited for this video. In this video I try out this palette. This is the Vampyrism Palette by Jolie Beauty. This is a UK based brand that I found out about basically through YouTube. They recommended one of Jolie Cash's videos to me. It was basically the video introducing this palette. So yeah, thank you for those, you know, targeted recommendations that got me to spend more money on a palette. But I was very interested in this palette once I saw it. I did just show the inside, but I will show it again. So yes, Vampyrism, it's kind of has like those red tones, kind of reminiscent of blood. It's very grungy, very nice fall palette overall. There's shimmers, mattes, there's a couple of pressed glitters in the palette. Overall, so you get a different array of textures, which I think is really nice. This retails for $53 USD. I ordered it October 1st and I got it today, which is October 16th. So, and I'm in the US and I ordered from the UK. It's either shipped from the UK or Ireland, I'm not sure. But I think it came pretty quickly, about 2 weeks, not too bad. I was expecting it to take a little bit longer, especially because this was a pre-sale. This palette on its own is currently out of stock. There may be a bundle where this palette is still available on the website, but I'm sure it will restock. I also purchased, which I think I'm going to do another separate video on this palette. This is the Sorceress palette, also by Jolie Beauty. So I haven't tried them before, but these palettes really called to me. They have like a really gothic, witchy, cool vibe to them. This is like the cool tone sister. This one came out first. This is the cool tone sister to the Vampyrism palette. You'll get 28 shades overall, so it is definitely a larger palette. I know not everybody's crazy about a larger palette, but I don't really mind. I think this is actually pretty, these are both have pretty strong color stories, and it just gives you a lot of options and a lot of similar tones, so you can do like nice gradients and things like that. So if you want to see how I got this really fun vampiric look, if you want to see how I got this look and what I think of the shadows and how they perform, if you are interested in that, then keep on watching. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and get started. I've already done my brows and primed my lids with the P. Louise Basic Cosmetic Base in Yummy Yellow. And I'm going to open up the palette. This is the Vampyrism Palette by Jolie Beauty. I'm really excited to try this. I swatched a couple shades, but I haven't tried it on my eyes yet. So I really like this packaging. It's just like this like sleeve instead of like a box with bubble wrap or a box to keep opening and closing. If you want to keep it, you can keep it. And it's the same as the actual packaging of the palette. This is what the palette looks like. It's a very red tone, like grungy, smoky kind of deal. I have to say, this palette has an interesting smell to it. I'm not sure what that's about. It's like a chemically kind of like iron kind of smell. And it's a little, it kind of reminds you of something that's not as high quality. So I was a little bit concerned about that when I opened it. It's pretty strong smell. It's not, I don't notice it in the other palette that I got from her, the Sorceress palette, but this one does have a little bit of a weird smell to it. But the shades look pretty nice, and what I swatched looked pretty promising. So I'm just going to go ahead and get started. I'm going to use this large fluffy blending brush from Cash Beauty. And I want to start with the shade Craving right here. It looks kind of pink, but it's, yeah, I guess it's like a beigey pink kind of shade. I'm going to use this as a transition. There is some kick up, it's nothing too crazy. And we're just going to go right above the crease with this. So this shade is very light, so it's just like a really good shade to like start slowly building on, so you can have something really soft and blend it out. Even if it gets really intense, we can build it out slowly and it won't be a crazy situation. And I love it. It comes with a nice huge mirror and it says, "I'm a vampire, I have no reflection." I think the overall presentation is pretty nice. It's just like a cardboard packaging. It doesn't feel super luxe really at all, but it's a nice presentation. Definitely some thought put into the concept. of the palette. Just going to blend that out a little bit more. I'm going to go in with the shade Michael over here. It's a similar tone to Craving, just slightly deeper. They're both cool toned. And I'm just going to continue to build. So far these are applying nice and smoothly to the lid, but these are pretty light shades. So here's what we have going so far. So far so good. Overall still very light. I'm going to start to deepen up a little bit with the shade Fangs right here. This one kind of has like that kind of pukey, greenish brown kind of tone to it. And there is a little more kick up in the pan with this one than the first two. And I'm using a smaller Cash Beauty blending brush, and I'm just going to kind of go in my true crease with this and start to finally build up the color a little bit more. The thing now is where we're going to see if I start getting patchiness or anything like that. So far we're still looking quite smooth, and the pigmentation is pretty good. It's not super heavy, but it's definitely there. I'm going to go back to the larger blending brush to just fluff it out a little more and blend it out a little more. And I'm using that first shade Craving that we used, just to keep it like nice and blown out. This is what we have going so far. Everything looks smooth so far. I'm not seeing any patchiness, and this colors are really buildable. Like mid pigment, not like super pigmented, but not super sheer either. So it takes a little extra work, especially for the palette with these kind of tones. You know, you're definitely gonna do something, or you most likely you'll want to experiment with something that's dark and deep and smoky and grungy and all of that. So it does take a while to get there, I feel like. I mean, there's definitely darker mattes in the palette if you want to just go in with those. It'd probably have like a quicker, darker, smokier effect. But we're getting there. I think that looks pretty good. Okay, so this is what we have going so far. I think that looks pretty good. I am going to cut the crease. I'm just using this e.l.f. brush. This came in the e.l.f. Tuvlo Electric Mood collection. This is just like a packing brush, or like it's kind of flat enough to use to cut the crease. And I'm going to use this P. Louise. This is the Prime and Define. This is a cosmetic base, but it's kind of metallic. It's really more of like a sparkly base, and it's in the shade Extra AF. It's a gold shade. So I'm just going to put a little bit of this on my, more of like a bronzy shade, I would say, with a little bit of a duochrome flip to it. So I just put a little bit of that in my hand. I'm just going to take that with this These bases are really cool. I feel like you could even just wear that on its own. It looks really nice. Of course, if you want the truest color with your shadows, it makes most sense to go in with a white or something that's, you know, a skin tone color when you're cutting the crease and when you're priming. But if you have like an overall color theme that you're going for, especially if you want to go for something that's like a little bit grungier, a little bit more naturally muddier, doing these colorful bases, like I use like a little bit of a light yellow base, which, you know, since we're doing these tones, I think is fine, but you could do something a little bit deeper if you wanted as an all-over base with a darker look. And this kind of sparkly, we're going to go with something sparkly and duochromy or multi-chromy on the lid from the palette, so I think that this base is perfect for that. It's just like a lighter tone. And it will I think it'll mesh really well with the eyeshadow we put on top. But it's not as stark as cutting the crease with a concealer, so it's a little more forgiving, I think, which is nice. I'm going to take this Unicorn Cosmetics. This is kind of like a smudger brush, but I have small lids, so I'm just going to use it as a packing brush. I'm going to go into the shade Vampyrism, the namesake shade in the palette. So this is the one that's kind of shifty and multi-chromy. See that right there? I'm just going to go over where we, oh my God, look at that. I don't know if you can see that. As soon as I put that on, it's just so intense. Even on top of that base, which was already pretty shifty and cool, this is just like popping like crazy. I guess it's like a gold, greenish old gold kind of vibe. Like in certain angles it's gonna look a little more green, and other angles it's gonna look a little more goldy bronze. But it's very, very metallic and bright and really cool looking. That is really awesome. The eyeshadow seems really smooth and it really builds nicely. And it's not like super multi-chromic where it's changing into a bunch of different colors, but there's definitely a strong shift to it. It's definitely a unique tone. I do have a little bit of fallout, but nothing crazy so far. I haven't worked really with too many deep mattes just yet. But these eyeshadows don't seem super messy, which is nice. I'm gonna use this medium-sized blending brush from Cash Beauty, and I am going to deepen up that outer edge where we cut the crease. I think I want to use the shade Afterlife right here, which is just like burgundy. These shades are kind of similar, so you can do really good gradients with this palette. So I'm just going to use, and again, there is more kick up here. It's kind of similar to that Fang shade that we used in the crease. So that's just the texture of the eyeshadows. But I'm just going to deepen this outer edge where I cut the crease, and just like the outer edge in general. So this is always a little tricky when you cut the crease to kind of obscure that edge without it looking too harsh where the cut crease ends in like the center of the lid if you're doing a half cut crease. But overall I think that this is looking pretty nice so far. It's not really sticking in a weird way. You know, it's still going to take a little work to really conceal that, but sometimes you get something where it's just really sticking, and this is looking very smooth at this point. Yeah, these shadows are very buildable. They're not heavily pigmented at all. Which I guess is pretty nice, because if you want to build it, it's not so intimidating where you're going to get this really intense, deep, smoky, grungy look right off the bat. Like you can kind of work to get there, but you can also it's also going to be a little easier to do something a little more sheer, and you're not, it's a little harder to screw up with the buildability. Yeah, I think overall that's looking really nice. Everything's really looking very smooth. I'm just kind of buffing those outer edges a little bit. I'm gonna go back into Fangs, this one right here, and I'm just going to put a little bit of that on the outer edge so we can keep that in the look. I'm going to take this small blending brush from Cash Beauty, and I'm going to go into this shade Shadows, which is a black. It doesn't look like the deepest black, but I kind of like to take just a little tiny bit of that to really deepen up and obscure that outer edge area without it going all over the place and us just seeing black. That's not what I want. Similar amount of kick up to the other mid-tone and deep shades that we used. This black is not my favorite. It's like really not that pigmented. I guess overall these eyeshadows they're not super pigmented. You have to build them. But I don't think this black will be that buildable. And I'm now starting to see some more sticking. That's again because I cut the crease. It's not just like general patchiness. It has to do with this, what I've done here. That's what we have going so far. I'm gonna go back to the medium blending brush and back into the shade Afterlife. And just kind of mesh that with a little bit of black. Just blending the outer edge once more. I'm going back into the shade Michael, which is this kind of slightly deeper, cool tone transition, just to kind of blow this out again. So this is what we have going so far. I think that this is looking pretty good. The only shade that I'm really not liking is the shade Shadows. It's just not really pigmented at all. The other shades build it up well enough. There's nothing super crazy pigmented in this palette, but that black it's just not doing it for me. And I'm just kind of thinking about what else I want to do. I'm going to take this P. Louise angled liner brush, and I'm going to go into the shade Bitten, which is another one of the multi-chromes. This is kind of it shifts from like a more violet purple to like a more burgundy color. And I'm just going to take this on my brush. I'm just going to wet my brush a little bit with the ABH Dewy Set Setting Spray. And I'm just going to go right where I cut the crease, to kind of line that edge, give it a little bit of a something extra. I don't know if you could really see that, probably not, but it's just adding a little bit more fun multi-chrome-iness, like it's just a little bit of a more purpley tone to that like little edge there, and defining the cut crease just a little bit more. I'm gonna take this shade Lestat over here. It's like a icy white with a little bit of a, it's hard to tell. Can't tell if it's like a gold shift or a blue shift, which is kind of weird. Or maybe it's just a straight up icy color. Yeah, I think this is actually just like a straight up icy white shade, which is perfect to highlight the inner corner with. And I'm going back into that Unicorn Cosmetics brush, and I'm just gonna highlight the inner corner just a little bit. Yeah, this is just like an icy white. I'm like, what does it shift to? No, it's just a normal color. But I always like icy whites, and that looks really pretty in the inner corner. So I think we're done with the eyeshadow on the upper part of the lids. I think that this looks pretty good. It's intense, but it's not super intense, and the shades go really well together, and everything for the most part is really smooth and blended. Again, we couldn't get enough depth or too much depth with the black shade, and just in general it takes a lot of building with these shadows. So this doesn't go, I don't think this palette goes as deep as maybe you would expect, but I do think it looks pretty. I'm just gonna create a winged liner off camera and do some mascara, and I will be back to finish the lower lids. Okay, I got my wing, I got my mascara on. I'm loving this look. I think it looks great. I am going to line my waterline. This is the Marc Jacobs Fine Liner Ultra Skinny Gel Crayon. I'm not sure what shade it is. It's just like an eggplanty shade. So I'm going to conceal under my eyes. I'm going to use the Jeffree Star. This is the Magic Star, I think it's called, Magic Star Concealer. This is in the shade C3. This is probably my favorite concealer. So that's looking pretty freaking bright, but that's just the under eyes concealed. I just want to finish the lower lash, and I think everything will look better once I finish my face. I'm just going to take this small Cash Beauty blending brush, and I'm just going to go with this true red shade. This is called Immortality on the lower lash, just for fun. That's just the shade I want to play with. I didn't get to try this shade, but this also looks very pretty. This shade Soulless here. But we're going to go with the red on the lower lash. This red definitely comes off more pigmented than any of the other shadows we used. It's giving me a pretty intense lower lash line, which is fine. Giving it more of a vampiric look to it, which is, I guess, what we should be going for with this palette. I'm just going to keep this really messy and maybe just buff it out a little bit with the concealer, with the sponge rather. Not what I was going for. I think it's just because I use this blending brush. It's a little too fluffy and this eyeshadow is a little too pigmented, but that is really fun. It's just so, it's like blown out and super red. And the red doesn't come off too orange toned. It still has a purpliness to it. So it still goes pretty well with the rest of the look. I'm just gonna finish the eyes with some mascara on the lower lash. So this is the eyes done. I think that they're really pretty. I really like how that lower lash line came out, even though it was really blown out, which kind of makes sense because I was using a blending brush and the eyeshadow was pretty pigmented, but everything blended really nicely. These shadows are very smooth. I didn't really have any patchiness. They're very buildable, very mid-tone pigmented, not a ton of pigment overall. That's the only thing that I was a little bit surprised. I was expecting a little more intensity with this palette. But I think this look did come out pretty intense, and I'm loving the multi-chromes. I used 2 of the multi-chromes in this look, and they look really cool and really fun. And I think that lower lash line looks great with it. I'm gonna finish the rest of my face off camera, and then I will be back to do some lips. Okay, so I have the rest of my complexion done, and I'm going to finish with this. This is the Wet n Wild Cloud Pout. I really enjoy these. And it's just like a brown shade. I'll list it on the screen. I can't read it because the font on the bottom is incredibly tiny. So this is the final look. I really like this look. I think it came out really fun. The eyes look really grungy and smoky, but kind of like a warm tone smoky. It's not super cool tone, even though we did start off with cool tone transitions. The other shades kind of just give it like a nice mustardy, mustard gas, smoky vibe. I don't know. I think it's really pretty. How do I feel about the palette? So far, I feel like it's pretty good. I feel like this look didn't really give me any trouble. I was able to build the eyeshadows to a nice intensity. I really like the 2 multi-chromes in the palette. It's really cool that those are included, the namesake shade Vampyrism and Bitten. Those are very pretty. There are 2 pressed glitters in this palette. I did not try those. It just didn't end up going with the overall look, but I would definitely want to do something more with just the reds and incorporate the pressed glitter. I think that that would be a lot of fun. I'm kind of realizing that my brush I must not wipe my brush off perfectly when I put the shade Immortality, because as I swatch it out, it is a lot more of a orangey ready tone, and under my eyes is looking a lot more like this. So I think that that's because of this eyeshadow. So all of those are kind of mixed on the lower lash, I want to say. But I do like that blown out lower lash. It definitely gives it that creepy, vampiric, sunken look. I think the eyeshadows perform really nice overall. I just really didn't like this black one. I think that there's nothing to it. It was just disappointing. Maybe if I try it again, I'll have better luck. But the other shadows all perform pretty nicely. I think that overall this look really came together. I think this palette is really fun. This is something that I think is really fun for beginners, someone who, you know, kind of wants to get into these heavier colors but doesn't want to jump into something super intense and pigmented right away. I don't think this palette is very intense in spite of its tones, but I do think that my look came out really nice overall, and I'm excited to play with this palette a little bit more. Anyway, thank you for watching. Please subscribe and have a good one. Bye, guys.